The last time I checked, an officer is an officer and an inmate is an inmate. But it seems like some places, some agencies are getting away from that. Some officers are forgetting that. Some upper management is forgetting that. Are we in corrections being influenced by the outside? You know, for example, an inmate says, "Don't call me an inmate. I'm an incarcerated person." Or a former inmate, "Don't call me a former inmate. I'm a formerly incarcerated person." Well, the last time I checked, and here's some examples I'm going to throw up here. My count sheet still says inmate count. Classification still says inmate classification. The handbook still says inmate handbook. The visitation list still says inmate visitation. The inmate lookup on all the jails and prisons still says inmate on it. I mean, everywhere I turn, it says inmate. And then the DC number. What is so offensive about being called an inmate? I'm an officer. You're an inmate. It's been that way since I started back in 1990, and it still is today. But yet we have people getting offended when we call an inmate an inmate. You know, it's unbelievable to me what's happening. And look what's happening with all the inmate relationships that are happening now. Are officers forgetting that they're an officer? You're an officer. You're in charge. You don't bring inmates things. You don't fall in love with inmates or lust or whatever you want to call it. You're the officer. You're in charge, and the inmate is the inmate. We need to get back to that thinking, because every time you talk to somebody that gets offended, you know, the ones that get offended real easy, I'm not an inmate. I'm an incarcerated person, or I'm a former. Don't call me a former inmate. I'm a formerly incarcerated person. Come on. You know what? If I commit a crime, which I'm not going to do intentionally, and I end up going to jail or prison, I'm an inmate. You know, you don't have to call me an incarcerated person. You're not going to hurt my feelings because I did something wrong. I broke the law and I went to jail. I'm an inmate, folks, and people in uniform are an officer. They're in charge, and I'm just doing my time, and I need to follow the rules and regulations of the prison or the jail. Another example, inmate rules and regulations. I mean, everywhere you look, it's inmate, folks. We don't play with the inmates. We don't bring the inmates contraband. We don't have sex with the inmates. I just had to get this out here. I turn and I see things. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody that knows me understands that I'm against corruption. I do not like corrupt officers at all. Everybody that knows me also knows that I know an inmate is an inmate, and if an inmate's involved in the contraband smuggling or attacking an officer, we want to get them punished and get new charges placed on them, you know, just as much as we would a corrupt officer. You know, we're not going to bow down, you know, to the inmates' demands. And I think a lot of officers that we're seeing lately, yes, they're being manipulated, but come on, we all know right from wrong, don't we? No matter how much we talk about being manipulated, it happens. But we know right from wrong, okay? You know you're an officer, and that's an inmate. Come on. If an inmate asks you to bring something in, don't bring it in. Give them only what they're allowed to have. Let them know you're in charge. If you're a female officer, when they say, oh, you smell good today, your hair looks pretty today, put them in their place right away. Don't say thank you and giggle. Good God. Same with you, man, when you work in a women's prison. Oh, what's that cologne you have on? You really smell good. Don't say thank you and then tell them what kind of cologne you wear. Please, come on. Let's get back to being an officer. Okay, let's get back to being in charge. Let's get back to enforcing rules and regulations. You know, I know that our hands are tied sometimes because management comes down with these rules. No, you have to contact us first before you do something. Well, in my mind, that's belittling the officer. Or how about the supervisor when the inmate says, I want to speak to a sergeant, and the sergeant comes in, and you and the inmate are standing there, and he takes the inmate off to the side to find out what's going on. That's happened. You talk about disrespecting your own staff and belittling your staff in front of the inmate. Hey, sergeants, lieutenants, don't do that. You ask the officer what's going on. And when the officer tells you what's going on, and he says or she says, I gave the inmate an order to lock down for count, and he refused or she refused, you better darn well side with that officer and tell that inmate locked down right now. Because if you don't have enough trust in your officers, then what's going on? You know? Don't go to the inmate and ask them what the problem is. You can do that after you find out what the officer has to say. Then you can look at the inmate and say, now, what's your problem? Why didn't you lock down? But don't let the inmate rattle on forever with 1,000 excuses. Tell the inmate to go lock down. This video is short. I'm going to stop now. But it's about being in charge and doing your job as a correctional officer. Don't let the inmates handle you. Don't let them take charge of you. Don't fall for their manipulation tactics. And you know right from wrong, right? Let's get back to the basics of running a jail or a prison. And let's get back to enforcing the rules and having the inmates follow the rules. Inmates, officer. You're the officer. That's the inmate. You're in charge. Thank you very much. Gary York, True Prison Stories. Please subscribe.